Hello there and welcome back. Now our next guest is a leader who strongly advocates the benefits of nuclear power. This, of course, she has a tremendous strong background in this area and has been working very hard to ensure nuclear energy gets the role it deserves in the energy mix and indeed in the energy mix of the future. So I'm absolutely delighted now to welcome here to ABLF, the Director General of the World Nuclear Association, Dr. Sama Bilbao in Lyon. Thank you so much for being with us. Dr. Sama.
Thank you, Edna. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, we have lots to talk about and, a wonderful topic here. And when we look at decarbonizing the power sector, I think without a doubt, there's an opinion that nuclear energy can certainly play a very important role. Where do you think the challenges and the big opportunities are ahead in nuclear power?
Yes, I agree with you. I think that when we are looking at the decarbonization of the power sector, clearly nuclear has a great opportunity. But you know what? I think I would go beyond that. I think that not only nuclear can produce clean, reliable, 24/7 electricity, but just as importantly, nuclear at the same time can produce low carbon heat. So I think that this brings us yet a new set of opportunities that are going to allow us to decarbonize other difficult to abate sectors. So for example, through electricity or through heat, maybe through the production of hydrogen, maybe through district heating or high temperature heat for industrial applications, we may be able to start decarbonizing other industries, chemical industry, petrochemical, and even transportation, including shipping and air transportation by synthetic fuels, etc. So I truly think that nuclear energy has an enormous opportunity to help decarbonize all energy sectors. But of course, and I think that it's also important that we can offer a lot of flexibility. So we can have maybe large reactors that can bring in a large chunk of new electricity, new energy into our country. But also we are bringing now these smaller modular reactors or also the micro reactors that are going to be maybe much more flexible. They are going to be much more capable to adapt to smaller, more distributed grids, which is probably something that perhaps smaller countries and developing countries are very much looking forward to. So those are obviously the opportunities, but there is, as you said, there is clearly challenges. So I would say that the biggest challenge that the nuclear energy has will be that we really need to align the possibilities and the promises that we are making in many countries with the policies, the development plans, and the government support. I really think that if we establish a level playing field in the energy markets that eventually are going to drive the investment in future clean energy infrastructure, and we allow nuclear energy to be treated in the exact same way as the other low carbon technologies, we would really be able to recognize the value that nuclear energy brings, not only because of the reliability, the low carbon, the fact that it's 24/7, the fact that actually lowers the overall costs of the system, and of course, the fact that it's very compact, that you can use it in a very small space, that is quite effective in using a small amount of raw materials and resources. So in general, I think that if we allow this level playing field, we will be able to much more effectively deploy nuclear at a global scale.
Align the possibilities with the policy. I like that. I think it's the quote of the day, and I think it's something indeed that everyone really has to be looking at. We're looking at lowering emissions, and we have to also look at behavior. We have to look at people's behavior. Do you think that, as a result of the current pandemic, is that behavior changing in a positive or a negative way when it comes to the environment?
I think that this pandemic has woken all of us up a little bit, and we have become much more aware of, number one, that we truly live in a global world, and each one's actions have an impact at a global level. So I think that the behaviors are changing a little bit, but I think that much more work is needed. And I think that in that sense, the leadership of governments is going to be very, very important at this point, because this pandemic has brought obviously very many not so good consequences, but perhaps we can turn it around and make it provide us a great opportunity for governments to use these economic stimuli that are being put in place and all the efforts that we are making for the economic recovery to actually develop resilient, clean energy infrastructure. So essentially, we can really take the leadership to build back better. I think you've heard this quite a bit, but I think it's very important. So maybe we can use the impetus that we all are getting coming out of this pandemic to really accelerate the deployment of clean infrastructure, clean, resilient infrastructure at a global level.
Absolutely, and I think it has given time to people to stand back and really to assess what's going on. And also it's given time to countries when we've seen perhaps not a huge demand on energy and how people are going to look at it and look at the diversification and look at the next steps. Now, of course, you often talk too, about the role of nuclear energy when we look at meeting the UN SDG goals, and the development goals, absolutely important. Everybody needs to deal with them and all governments need to deal with them. But what would you say that governments perhaps really need to focus on to actually ensure this objective of meeting the sustainable development goals?
Yes. No, thank you for that question. I think it's very important to bring this back to the equation. I think that maybe in the OECD countries, in the developed world, we have been very, very focused on decarbonization, which is obviously quite important, but we cannot lose sight that for a very large number of countries in the world, decarbonization is maybe not their first priority. They really are much more focused in actually bringing the socio-economic benefits to everybody in the population, essentially raising the standard of living of everybody in their countries. So in this sense, I think that having access to clean, affordable energy is going to be vital to meet all the 17 sustainable development goals that have been proposed by the United Nations. And I would say in particular, nuclear energy clearly is going to talk about exactly that, clean, affordable energy, and of course, meeting the climate change challenges. But I would say that nuclear energy can also provide quite a lot of benefits when we are talking about human health and well-being, because obviously it's not only the fact that we are bringing low carbon energy into the mix, but this is also going to be clean air energy, clean water energy, and also is going to bring some of the benefits from nuclear medicine to many of these countries. So nuclear technology brings additional benefits beyond the energy per se. And then, of course, I think that electrification and having access to 24/7 electricity is going to be super important to bring access to education and learning to everybody, which is one of the goals again, but also I would say in particular to women. We celebrate yesterday International Women's Day, and I truly think that having access to electricity is going to allow women everywhere in the world to be able to contribute all their talents at all levels in society. And then finally, I would say that from the point of view of infrastructure, innovation, industry, having access to, as I said, large-scale, scalable and low-carbon energy, electricity is going to help many countries to actually bring up their industry. They are going to be able to develop innovation and infrastructure, once again, bringing several of the other sustainable development goals. So I really think that countries, obviously, countries are very different, very diverse. So each country has their own natural resource endowments. They all have their culture, their history, their way of thinking. And obviously they all are going to themselves select the combination of technologies, the combination of energy sources that are really going to help them realize these sustainable development goals. And in that sense, I think it's very important for multilateral development banks, for import-export banks to really develop technology-neutral policies and criteria so countries themselves can make the choice on what is it that is going to be best for them in their particular context to get forward in sustainable development.
Indeed, it's such a very important point that each country, have their own say in terms of the development. When we look at access to energy in so many countries around the world, I mean, there are still millions of people that need basic access. We take it so much for granted that we just, turn the lights on. I think that the US got a big awakening, when they had such a bad storm and lost power in Texas. I mean, people couldn't. It's like the fact that we really take it for granted, while we have to look at some developing countries whereby, maybe 60% of their population don't even have access. So we have to look at, the responses and the solutions that are out there. And again, as you say, work with the development banks and everybody to make sure that it can be rolled out to countries who need it. But when we look at nuclear energy, we just look at it around the world, it operates, extremely well in some countries, and there's big fans of nuclear energy. But then there's a lot of people that are very opposed to nuclear energy.
Mm-hmm.
What can you say to reassure the skeptics out there, perhaps, who might shy away from nuclear energy?
Right. I think it's quite interesting. I think that there is much more people that, in fact, are supportive of nuclear than people that are not supportive of nuclear. However, unfortunately, as you very well pointed out, we tend to hear much more about those of us that perhaps are not particularly supportive of nuclear technology. So, when I look at currently the global situation and what are the plans for many countries, you will realize that many countries are actually moving forward with nuclear technology, and the populations are actually supportive of this technology. And unfortunately, we most often only hear about the countries that perhaps are not very supportive. Clearly, everybody has heard about Germany, everybody has heard about perhaps Spain or Belgium. However, you don't hear that, for example, most of the West Eastern European countries are very focused on using nuclear technology to actually remove or phase out much faster than otherwise they could, for example, coal. So I would say that you are right in the sense that the nuclear community, the nuclear sector, we perhaps have not been very well communicated the many advantages, the many positive aspects that nuclear brings to the fore. Perhaps there is much more focus on the negatives. But at the same time, I think that the fact that nuclear energy has been providing clean, affordable electricity for the last 4 years all over the world clearly is a very good news story. I don't know if you know that right now in OECD countries, nuclear energy is the low carbon energy source that provides most of the electricity, and that is much more than wind and solar combined. So clearly that is a very good story there. And I know that a lot of people maybe are concerned about issues related to safety. They are concerned about the famous issue with the used fuel and the nuclear waste. But I really think that we need to provide all these facts in perspective. The reality is that nuclear industry is among the safest industries in the world, certainly the safest ways to produce energy. And when we are talking about the used fuel and the nuclear waste, clearly nuclear is the only energy that currently actually accounts for all the waste that has produced throughout the history of the industry. So we know exactly where it is. We have been managing from day zero, and not only that, the cost of managing that material is actually included in the price of the electricity, which is something that not many, actually none of the other energy sources can say. So as you said, Edna, the nuclear community, we really need to do a much better job, maybe bringing forward the positive news and explaining the things that perhaps need to be more clear.
Yes, indeed. And as a former journalist, I know what gets in the headlines, and it does tend to be, if it's a good headline, that gets all the attention, and nobody mentions all of the great work that is going on. So that's sadly the way of the world. We have a lot of questions coming in for you, a lot of interest. Some of that you have already addressed. We had a question from Tarek from Saudi Arabia talking about how nuclear can contribute to the UN SDG goals. You've already covered that, so thank you so much. Another question coming in from Marie Angela in Lisbon in Portugal. How important is it for developing nations to focus on perhaps incorporating nuclear energy in the energy mix? And you mentioned small reactors there. And is there a way to maybe streamline the way new reactors are designed, in emerging economies? So perhaps if you might address that.
Yes. No, certainly. As you probably have heard, this has become quite in the mainstream lately. We have been working on what we call small modular reactors. These reactors are obviously smaller, and the idea is they are going to be probably factory fabricated, and they are going to be fabricated in a very, very efficient manner. And I think that these reactors are going to bring quite a few opportunities for newcomer countries, for perhaps countries that have smaller electricity grids, that is, or perhaps smaller electricity needs. And these reactors are going to be much more easily deployed, and also they are going to be much more affordable. I think that the fact that we are talking about a much smaller investment is going to help smaller countries to perhaps look at this big infrastructure development investment. So, but definitely one of the things that is very important is the streamlining of the licensing process. As you know, there is very, very stringent, very robust regulatory processes throughout the world in order to license and in order to regulate the operation and the management of nuclear power plants. So, but we really need to make sure that we put in place an international regime that is more or less streamlined, so we don't have to go through the licensing process for each reactor every time at every new country. So, for example, from the World Nuclear Association, we are currently working with a number of regulators and industry experts to bring forward some proposals that perhaps are going to help to streamline that process and help countries to be able to deploy smaller reactors much more effectively, in a timely manner, so we can actually meet their energy needs as soon as possible.
Now we have another question here from Thailand, actually from Jehanna in Thailand. And clearly you're in your job as the Director General of the World Nuclear Association only a few months, really. So well done and big congratulations on that. But previously, you were head of the Division of Nuclear Technology Development with the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency. So looking on a wider level here, and Jehanna from Thailand is looking at maybe the key areas, particularly in Asia, and looking across the world. So what would you say are the key focus areas for nuclear in Asia?
Yeah, Asia is actually becoming the new center of nuclear. Obviously, China has been driving the development, and you probably heard just earlier in the year, there was the connection to the grid from the first Huanglong 1 reactor, which is a new reactor design that is Chinese. So Asia is definitely going to be a center. India is also coming up with many new interesting indigenous reactors. And I think that there is a number of countries in Asia that are very, very closely paying attention to the developments in nuclear. So I think that that Bangladesh is currently in the construction of the first nuclear power plant, which is going to help very much with the sustainable development for the country. And there is a number of other countries, such as for example, Philippines, that they are also very, very carefully looking at that. So I think that the developments in Asia are going to very much drive the rest of the world. I think that the traditional suppliers of nuclear reactors in Europe, perhaps in North America, are really going to need to meet the needs of Asian countries, which is going to be clearly a lot of electricity. But I think that these countries, as I mentioned earlier, are also going to be quite interested in making sure that we can decarbonize other sectors, such as, for example, transportation, such as, for example, the petrochemical industry, and maybe shipping, and maybe even heating and cooling for normal spaces. So I think that the demands that we are going to get from Asia are going to very much drive the market at a global level.
We have a few more questions coming in. One from Emma in Dubai. Where do you think countries like the UAE and other countries perhaps in the Middle East stand when it comes to adopting clean energy measures? And clearly the UAE is probably at the forefront when it comes to nuclear, and also diversification of energy, but particularly clean energy measures when we look around this region, particularly in the Middle East.
Yeah, I think that the Middle East, and obviously, as you just said, the United Arab Emirates is a very good example of diversifying the portfolio and looking very consciously, very pragmatically at using low carbon energy resources. But I think that many other countries in the region are doing the same. I mean, for example, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I know that there is a number of projects that are moving forward in there, trying to diversify the sources of energy, making them more and more clean. I mean, whether it is by bringing low carbon energy sources, and of course, that the use of carbon sequestration and utilization are definitely going to be incorporated in these countries. So I think that these countries are becoming much more proactive. They are becoming much more open to the innovations and the different technologies that are coming out from the outside. And let me just say, I think that the United Arab Emirates is a very good example to follow for many other countries. They have paved the way on how to develop the infrastructure that is needed to start from absolute scratch nuclear engineering, nuclear energy program, for example, that is, again, one of the potential choices that some countries can choose if they want to embrace zero carbon technologies.
Now, when we look at, I suppose, collaboration, in the nuclear energy, in the global nuclear energy, do you believe that there needs to be much closer and stronger collaboration, and how can the World Nuclear Association perhaps play a key role in making sure that this happens?
Yes. No, I think that at a working level, the nuclear industry in general, there is a lot of collaboration. That we really exchange information and lessons learned regularly every day, and we learn from each other quite often. But I would agree that perhaps at a bigger level, at a strategic level, the overall nuclear community, we can really do a little bit better to, if nothing else, as we mentioned earlier, to communicate them better, to perhaps do a better job bringing forward the advantages and a lot of the work that we are doing behind the scenes that often is not clear. So in that sense, World Nuclear Association, I think that we are in a very good place because we are currently the only global organization whose mandate is to actually create this predisposition among global stakeholders, energy and financing and policy making stakeholders, specifically on nuclear. So clearly we are in a very good location to actually bring this information to all of you, to everybody. And also I would say the fact that we bring the expertise of our members. We have more than 180 members from 40 some countries. throughout the entire fuel cycle, throughout the entire nuclear sector. So frankly, I feel quite comfortable when I go around the world and I bring to you the positions and the opinions and the stance of the global nuclear industry. I mean, I really feel that I'm speaking with very good authority, with the knowledge and the expertise of all our members and from the global nuclear community.
Now, a few more questions, so just let's get them in here. And one I think you addressed earlier on, Sophie from Belgium had asked about the myths and misconceptions that people have about nuclear energy, but I think you addressed that well when we talked about, countries opposed and all of that. But another one, I suppose, a follow-up from just what you talked about there, from Tetsui Ari. What is the role of nuclear energy in the circular carbon economy, particularly in oil-producing countries?
Yes, I think this is fascinating. I think that nuclear energy, and I mentioned that very briefly earlier, that when we are looking at the at the circular economy, we really are trying to use resources as effectively as possible. So we are trying to use as little resources as possible, and then we are trying to recycle them, to reuse them back as much as possible. So I would say that nuclear energy from its inception has been probably a very good example of that. So as you know, because nuclear energy is such a dense, such a concentrated energy source, the amount of raw materials, the amount of resources that are needed to really exploit the energy that we have in uranium is really, really small. So this, of course, means that we need a very small footprint. We need very few raw materials to actually extract the energy of the atom. And of course, this also translates on a very small amount of very, very concentrated nuclear waste and use nuclear fuel at the end of the cycle. So that is something that within nuclear we have been doing for a long time. And I think that this is going to help quite a lot as the rest of the world is becoming conscious of minimizing the use of resources, because we can really help, as I said earlier, but with the same nuclear power plant, we can produce both the electricity and the heat. Again, it's going to be a way to optimize and be much more effective with the raw materials that we are using.
Now, another question here from Neil in Dubai, and this is probably the last question that I can take on this. Compared to other sustainable energy sources like solar, wind, etc., nuclear requires a massive initial investment. I mean, it is not cheap, that capital upfront investment that has to be made. What recommendations, do you make in terms of, and particularly again for developing countries, and I know you mentioned it very, very briefly there, but what can be done to actually make nuclear, I suppose, more affordable for people?
Exactly. Well, let me maybe be a little bit more nuanced. I think that all low carbon energy sources are very capital intensive. And this is true for all of them: wind, solar, nuclear. Obviously, nuclear projects are bigger in general. So this is part of the reason why we are looking at a very large capital cost. But if you look at the cost of nuclear energy, over 70% of that cost is actually the financing of the project itself. So I would really say that what I mentioned earlier, making sure that nuclear energy, like solar, like wind, like other low carbon energy sources, has access to affordable financing is going to be a game changer in order to really bring down the final cost of nuclear. So, and in that sense, I would say that government support, government policies are going to be key. And I don't mean support as in financial support. I mean support as in providing confidence, providing certainty, providing a stable policy framework for investors, private, public, or a combination of both, to actually invest in these technologies. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it is quite important to ensure that multinational development banks and export-import banks, when they develop criteria to invest on different energy technologies, those criteria really need to be technology neutral. They need to be focused on the true advantages of the different energy sources.
Indeed, there's lots to be done, and in your role, I'm sure you're going to be making great headway, as you have already, in the years ahead. So we look forward to talking to you in person, hopefully, at our next event. So again, Dr. Salma Bilbao y Leon, the Director General from the World Nuclear Association, a big thanks to you from all of us.
Thank you, Edna, and thank you for the opportunity to chat with all of you today.
Thank you so much. And to our dear audience watching, stay with ABLF. We will be right back.